Hi folks, as you know, based on my last weekly overview for this particular week that we're in, it is astrologically a relatively quiet week, although I would encourage everyone to take advantage of this week after the full moon to get as much done as possible, to be as productive as possible because the energies are balanced. And you might find that you're finally able to get to certain things that you haven't been able to in a while, or that it's easier somehow to, now that we've made it over the full moony kind of emotional intensity of the weekend, the energies stand to be a little bit more balanced and allow us to actually get stuff done. We are, of course, heading into Mercury retrograde and the new moon in Leo on August 4th to August 5th. And when I do my next weekly overview, we will talk about that. We're also getting ready to exit out of the week before and after July the 17th, which is 2 months before the September 17th lunar eclipse. As I've said to you before, I don't know why, but my experience is that 2 months before lunar eclipse, the week before, week after, brings eclipsy events. It can be an increase in people transitioning, and this, one way to sort of data around this, for example, is around the number of sort of celebrities or famous people who pass on or transition just sort of increases. But more, that's kind of a relatively minor point, and one that we can't really empirically check when it comes to eclipse-related dates or periods. Does mortality and does the thinning of the veil really occur? I mean, I have not done the research. I don't have the data. I don't have the statistics. But people in situations being eclipsed and out of our lives, and sudden changes and announcements sort of coming in, all of that, of course, occurs. Now, a lot of this is related to where Pisces sits in our chart, the house occupied by Pisces. That's where the eclipses are moving to. I have done a video on Mercury retrograde. I have done a video on the new set of eclipses. I'll put links to them at the end of this, along with the last weekly overview. So those of you who are either new to the channel or have not yet caught up can get caught up on those. Today, I mean, talking about eclipse occurrences, since, and I keep wondering, is it 2 months before the eclipse, the lunar eclipse? Because roughly 2 months before lunar eclipse, there's going to be a full moon. So is it the week before and after July the 17th, or week before and after July the 21st? It's give or take 2 or 3 days. Certainly, since about July the 10th, there's been not much shortage of eclipsy events, even politically, on both sides of the aisle. Now, I am going to do, this particular video, I'm going to explain why I'm doing it in a second, but I'm going to once again request, as powerfully as I can, to not get political in the comments. It is a very contentious election and a painfully charged process this year, as it has been since 2016. So this is an astrology channel. I am certainly not going to talk about preferences, nor am I going to get on any kind of soapbox around anything, nor am I here to proselytize. This is really an astrological exercise. To some extent, it was an exercise that I was starting to do on my own. And I thought, well, why don't I just do this for the channel? Because in the process of looking at where the eclipses are going, where Jupiter is, where Saturn is, where the Mercury retrogrades are happening in various charts, I thought it kind of extends some of the discussions that we've been having. So once again, a strong and powerful request to not get political in the comments. There are lots of other channels and lots of other forums in which we can express our points of view powerfully. So you'll see as I do this video what the tone of it is and what I'm trying to get to. The second thing I wanted to mention is, as an astrologer, one of the milestones, personal milestones for me to trust myself more, was the 2016 election. On the election day of 2016, as we headed to the 2016 election, there was an overwhelming sense, the word on the street was clear that Clinton was going to win. In fact, it seemed impossible that she was not. New York Times, everybody, the punditry, even on the day of, until the votes started to come in, the idea that you could entertain the possibility of Trump winning the election was ridiculed and kicked out of the park so quickly that you could not, you could barely contemplate it. I remember the morning of that election when I looked at the charts, I heard, and I'm not saying this to congratulate, as I said, this is a personal thing from me. I thought Trump's was the stronger chart, and I'm going to go into why in a second at that time in 2016. But I dismissed it, I poo-pooed it, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous. You know, everybody is saying, all the exit polls, everybody who knows, everybody who should know is saying that this is impossible. And then by the end of the day, when it was a different outcome, it made me sit up. Now, various things have made me sit up as an astrologer during that time. But in 2016, 2017, that was the time when I was really starting to post videos. When I was really, and those of you who follow my channel know that I remain skeptical, healthily, I think, about astrology. And so there was a part of me that was developing my own relationship with the readings that I was doing, even at that time, the work that I was taking on, and so on and so forth. So there were powerful reminders. There were moments and milestones for me, and that election was certainly a milestone. And since then, even though some subscribers have encouraged me to do kind of more political or predictive stuff, it's not what I find the most interesting. And so I tend not to go there. But over the past 2 weeks, I've really been thinking, and even before what has recently happened on the Democrat side, I thought Harris had a strong chart at this point in time, although you cannot rule out Trump, and I'm going to get to that. But I thought, oh, well, the way this is probably going to work out is that if Biden gets reelected, he'll be in office for a year or two, and then Harris will likely to take over. And I'm not in a space of judging whether that should be a way to do this or not a way to do this, or what this is not. As an astrologer, you realize that what we think of as right or wrong, or this or that, or, sometimes it's like the universe has its plans. If it's going in this direction, what do those plans look like? So it was intriguing to me when the somewhat eclipsey things occurred over the past 2 weeks, and things switched or changed. I'm going to talk first a little bit about 2016 and why I thought what I thought. I'm going to talk about 2020 and why I felt at that time that Biden did have a chance of coming into office. And then I'll talk about this year. But the lens is really going to be very much astrological. The birth charts, the biggest caveat that I need to make in this video, of course, is that anything that I'm discussing is based on publicly available information. I have no way of checking and guaranteeing that this is accurate. I wasn't around when these folks were born or where they were born, and I just have to trust, to some extent for the purpose of this, that the data showing up is correct and accurate to the best of our ability. For Hillary Clinton especially, there are a couple of different versions of charts out there. The ones that claim to be the most accurate place make her Gemini rising, but there's also a chart out there that shows her as Scorpio rising. And I'm going to go with the Gemini rising because there seems to be, whatever's published out there seems to have gotten this from the birth certificate. True, false, and different, I don't know. So some of this may be, it's dependent on, just as it is for any personal reading, it's dependent on the information I'm given. I'm really reading a chart for a particular location and a particular date and a particular time. That's really what I'm doing. When you look at comparing outcomes like this for charts, it's less about who has the most powerful, it's less about looking for dramatic or clear signs of victory and more about thinking about who has the stronger chart. Okay, who has the stronger chart at that particular time? Who are the transits favoring more? Let's start with 2016, and at a certain point I'm going to look at 2020 and we're going to come to 2024. Donald Trump, according to the internet, is a Leo rising. Hillary Clinton, based on what I can find that I think is a little bit more reliable, is a Gemini rising. When I look at the transits that were occurring on November the 8th, 2016, the day of the election, first and foremost, one of the things we have to remember is that because Trump is Leo rising, Taurus is in his 10th house, and the Taurus full moon in November typically seems to, which is the full moon, often the closest full moon to the election, places the full moon, that particular full moon, in his 10th house of career. Now, that does not mean that, you know, every Leo rising person is favored to be the president of the United States of America. But it is an interesting thing to note. And I remember, you know, because especially when you have elections that you can have an election day and then you're trying to figure out whether they're going to be recounts or they're going to be re-this or re-that. And, you know, I remember noting that in Clinton's case, it was a full moon in her 12th house, the next full moon, and in Trump's case, in the 10th house. More importantly and significantly, the eclipses, and really what I want to look at are the eclipses, Jupiter and Saturn, when we go back to those past couple of eclipses. The eclipses for Trump at the time of the election were going through his second house. The North Node eclipses were in Virgo. And it's interesting because this time around, remember that the September 17th, now September 17th is maybe a milestone towards the presidential election, but really it's going to be the Taurus full moon if we're going to be looking at a full moon. And by that point in time, if we're going to be talking about a solar eclipse we're under the influence of, it's going to be the Libra solar eclipse that we're looking at. But in Trump's chart, in 2016, the North Node was pointing at the second house, the South Node in the 8th house. When we look at September the 17th, 18th, 2024, which is not directly related to the election, that's where the eclipses are headed to, and the week before and after July the 17th or July the 21st of this year, I consider indicators of that eclipse. We have the opposite phenomenon. The North Node is getting ready to move into the 8th house, the South Node getting ready to move in the 2nd house. Right now, for Trump, of course, the North Node is in the 9th, South Node is in the 3rd. I'll come to that. At the time of the 2016 election, North Node in the 2nd, South Node in the 8th, North Node as we headed into 2017, getting ready to move into his 1st house. And then I remember thinking that because after the 1st house, the eclipses would move into his 12th and then his 11th, I remember thinking the 2nd half of his presidency was likely to feel as though he had somehow been flattened. The energy would go out of things for him to some extent. It would not be quite as, if we want to use and please don't come after me for using, as I said, this is not about one versus the other, and let us all make no assumptions about who we are backing and who we are not backing. I'm just trying to read the chart. If I was doing a reading for him, for example, this is, you know, when you have the North Node eclipses in the 2nd house, the focus is on, and again, do not come after me, the focus, I would say this to anyone with a Leo rising. At that time, I'm a Leo rising, for example. That was the time when the universe was strongly encouraging me to focus on what it was that I had to offer to the world that was of value and start to generate an income using that. That was when the astrology really started to get invested in, and certain aspects of my acting really started to get invested in. And in 2017, I remember by the time and around November 2016, of course, we had Jupiter going through my 3rd house. That was when the social media YouTube videos really started to begin. So here's a perfect correlation of somebody else with a chart, with a Leo rising chart, where those eclipses are clear. And so the emphasis in a Leo rising chart is much more on individual achievement, what you are offering the world, how you are generating an income as a result of it. And especially as the eclipses move through the second to the first house, an encouragement of where you are going to shine and to take those opportunities. Eclipses moving into the first house are not as visible or perhaps exciting as eclipses moving into the 10th. The North Node eclipse is moving to the 10th, for example. But they're still strong enough, and especially when you compare it to Clinton's chart at the time, where the eclipses were getting ready. They were 4th house North Node eclipses, 10th house South Node eclipses, getting ready to move into the 3rd. Comparatively speaking, Trump had the stronger chart, the more visible chart, the chart that was pulling him. When you have the North Node eclipses going through the 4th house, now this is where the interpretation can be interesting. When the North Node is in the 4th house, you have to lean into the domestic sphere, the real estate sphere, sometimes move in order to elevate. You have to release something career related in order to get to the next level with it. One way to interpret this could be, oh, she's going to move into the White House and she's going to release something and expand much more local and expand into something bigger, except you have to remember where it was that she was coming from through the Obama years, where she was located, and the fact that her role under the Obama presidency was wide enough. So it isn't as if she was having to contemplate moving from Dallas to New York, or Copenhagen to London, or you know, something along those lines, in order to release something more locally that was career related to go into a bigger sphere. In Trump's case, as I said, as the first presidency would continue, as we got into the time when the North Node eclipses would start to move into his 12th house, the second half of his presidency would be affected by that, and that there would be, as I said, a flatness. When the eclipses move from the first, North Node moves from the 1st to the 12th, it's as if the universe, after pulling you in a certain direction, giving you a certain amount of visibility, it just all of a sudden drops you. It's like, what? Things were going well, and I had a certain amount of flash and prominence, and there was a direction I was moving in, and all of a sudden, by the time we get to, let's say, 2019, 2020, the energy, it's like, it's not quite the wind going behind it, but the energy just flattens out. It says the person enters a dark tunnel. Jupiter going over his 3rd, a rejuvenation of his immediate environment. I might have been starting to use social media and YouTube and these things in my relatively humble way, but I don't know if it is even worth contemplating what happened to Trump's social media use while Jupiter was going through his 3rd. And what started to be posted and published on Twitter and social media practically on a daily basis, in the way that platform started to be harnessed and used for his purposes. So when we look at, and in Clinton's case, interestingly, Jupiter for her was going through in a prominent part of in the 5th house, which would be the start of relationship with children, but also prominence. But one of the things that I look at for Jupiter when I'm looking for someone to take offices, I'm looking for Jupiter to actually be placed in the 3rd, in the 6th, in a place where the work-related sphere is more directly affected. The 3rd house used to be our immediate environment, especially concerning siblings, relatives, neighbors, things like school friends. In today's day and age, I find that colleagues as a group, with the 3rd house, I always call the 3rd house the well we live in on a day-to-day basis, our day-to-day commute, our neighborhood, our vicinity. Some people will say things like short distance travel, commuting. A lot of this also now includes for me virtual communities, whether we're working from home, whether we're going into an office, rather than us interacting on a day-to-day basis with our extended family or our joint families, as we call them in India, or our siblings or our school friends or our neighbors. We now on a day-to-day basis, that position, that idea of a day-to-day community that we're part of, for me more and more is collegial colleagues. When I see, for example, Jupiter going over someone's 3rd house or the South Node going over someone's 3rd house, very often I will see a person's work environment changing. With Jupiter, it is the introduction of a new circle of people that someone is going to be communicating with on a day-to-day basis. With the South Node, often I will see, in the going over the 3rd house, often I will see a change in job, a change in your immediate vicinity, a change in the people you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis, a release of that. In Trump's case, it was in the 3rd house. In Clinton's case, it was intriguing with Jupiter in the 5th house. And you would think that it would, but it's the end of a 12-13-year cycle, start of a 12-13-year cycle. And Jupiter was still a little bit away from entering the 6th, where you would expect job to change. And of course, it did, but not quite in this way. And again, we're talking about, for me, the most notable thing of the 2016 was you can't write Trump off with a chart like this and the transits that are currently there. That was my aha moment on 2016. I was like, why is everyone assuming this is a slam dunk? Charts-wise, this is not a slam dunk. The charts are at least on equal footing. And if anyone actually has the edge towards greater visibility, it is Trump in 2016 and not Clinton. That was one of those pivotal moments for me when I thought, and when that actually occurred, I thought this, I dismissed it, I threw it out the window. I thought this is not even in the realm of possibility. And then over the course of the next, that same day and over the course of the next week and a half, of course, we, as it certainly made me sit up as an astrologer. Now, let's move away from Hillary Clinton and let me make 2 adjustments to what I'm looking at. Let me move to 2020. Let me pull up Joe Biden's birth chart, because I'm not going to dwell too long on 2016 and 2020, because I think what we all want to get to is 2024, right? So thanks for your patience. I hope this is all for entertainment purposes only, as we say. So I hope you kind of enjoy this for what it's worth. And it just kind of makes you think in the same way that it's making me think. So we're now looking at the 3rd of November of 2020. Give me 1 second, please. Why is this acting up? Because, of course, why should anything be simple? When we get towards 2020, the North Node by that point in time has moved out of Trump's birth chart. Okay, no, what am I clicking? Okay. When we get to 2020, and this, you have to keep, this is important because it actually plays a role in 2024. When we get to November 2020, the North Node has moved out of Trump's 12th house and moved into his 11th house. But it's still just trying to think about something. Yeah. The 10th house eclipses were not going to start up for him till late 2021. In 2020, at around this time, when the North Node moves into the 11th house, it's like the train starts to come out of the 12th house tunnel. But a lot of the work that you might find yourself getting involved in is as a result of friends, networks, social circles pulling you out of that tunnel. You remember we were doing this at this time. We're getting ready to start this up again. It's not the eclipse of the North Node in the 11th house has more of an ensemble quality. You are not flat anymore. You are not resting. You are not exhausted as it was when the eclipses were going over, the North Node was going over your 12th house. You are not isolated as it was when the North Node was going over your 12th house. As the North Node eclipses move into the 11th house, the other people start to come back around and start to say, hey, do you want to, I thought of you for this. We've worked together on this before. Remember this project went on hold. This project is up again. The energy starts to pull you back out into the light again. And, excuse me, friends, networks, social circles, and being part, a little bit, there's an element of being part of a group a lot more, because the South Node, of course, is going over the 5th, and you are asked to release temporarily your stardom. Now, this is especially interesting in Trump's chart to some extent, because he does have his North Node in the 11th house. When you have your North Node in the 11th house natally, from a birth chart perspective, you are being encouraged to learn how to play within a group and do things for social betterment. It's a curious phenomenon in this chart with the South Node in the 5th for him and the North Node in Gemini. It's tricky because he's got his moon in the 5th house and his moon in Sagittarius and the North Node in the 11th. It's not a lifetime in which starry behavior leads to fulfillment, individually seeking the limelight. The 11th house demands that you use your innate stardom to benefit humanity in measurable ways. Again, I'm not going pro and con here, okay? Because I know that we can also, interestingly, with the South Node in the 11th, the South Node in the 5th, whether or not someone actually makes an effective parent, and whether or not someone should actually indulge in the romantic or the erotic. It's not encouraged. It's what is really being encouraged with the North Node in Gemini is the ability to listen and to take feedback and to pay attention to what is going on around you and what is being communicated to you, and to use your innate star power as signified by the South Node in the 5th for the betterment of humanity, as opposed to for one's own aggrandizement. Now, certainly, whether this has been followed or not followed, we're talking about someone who is relatively prominent, who it could be argued is successful and wealthy. So what I just said, you can take that with a grain of salt. Well, no, you don't take it with a grain of salt. I'll stand by it. I'll stand by it. And it's a full moon chart. The sun is in Gemini and the moon is in Sagittarius. So that is a prominent, heightened, emotional, visible chart. Often it doesn't have to play out on a global stage as it has with Trump, but people who have full moon charts tend to the ability to. I'm not quite as full moony, but as someone who has a sun in Sag and a moon in Taurus, not in Gemini, and the moon is getting full. Full moon chart. And in Trump's case, it is a full moon chart. There's a certain amount of foot stomping and volatility that comes with that. That comes with that territory. A certain amount of visibility, as I said. A kind of a culminating quality. Now, in 2020, North Node eclipses moving into the part of the chart that is pulling you out into the light, but is not pushing you into the 10th house yet. It's not pushing you into prominence. Also, at that time, he had Jupiter and Saturn going over his 6th house along with Pluto. So again, in the second half of his presidency, he had Saturn in his 6th, health issues, busyness, stress, increased responsibility on the job. Saturn is a taskmaster and merciless and karmic. And Jupiter, wherever Jupiter goes, ends a 12-13-year cycle and starts a 12-13-year cycle. By the time we get to 2020, it's not as if he's already been the president for 4 years. So it's not, if anything's going to end, it is going to be the current state of affairs that is going to end. I don't see Jupiter going over the 6th as being, oh, he's going to get a second term. When you look at Biden's chart, which is a Sagittarius rising chart, you have the North Node eclipses in the 7th house, getting ready to go into the 6th, which I thought at that time was interesting and curious. But you also had Jupiter in his 2nd house, ending a 12-13-year cycle related to income and how you earn and what you're offering to the world, and starting a 12-13-year cycle related to that. Again, I have to say, it's not, none of these are slam dunks, but in comparison to, and Saturn going over the 2nd demands a lot of hard work, but I find also rewards. I find Saturn going over the 2nd, especially close to the end of the transit, being one of the more rewarding transits, as long as someone has done the work and passed the milestones and passed the tests, so to speak. The thing I remember thinking along the Trump-Biden election was that it was more evenly matched chart-wise than the Trump-Clinton charts in 2016. It was still not, in my opinion, at that time, a slam dunk. You did have this phenomenon where you had, in Trump's case, the full moon in Taurus, the full moon in November, that seems to play such an important role with the United States election every 4 years. For Trump being in the 10th house of career, but for Biden being in the 6th house of job and work. And I remember thinking, if Biden gets the presidency, it will likely have a strong service component with the 6th house. Job, service, as opposed to 10th house limelight and fame and grandstanding, for those of you who look at that kind of stuff. The other thing that makes them interestingly and evenly matched is that in Trump's case, Trump's new year begins around now because he's a Leo rising. And Biden's new year, because he's Sagittarius rising, begins around November 21st, 22nd, 23rd. And when the sun is going over your 12th house, it often brings results related to the past 3 or 4 months of preparing for your new year. This is part of the reason why I thought, okay, with Trump and Biden, if Biden gets the presidency, he's not going to be as flashy as previous presidents. But you've got one person where the North Node is starting to pull him out of some of the darkness in the second half of his presidency, in Trump's case. But it still has very much of a let's recoup, let's regroup, let's think about what we're doing as a group. And I remember thinking at that time, what is tricky is that if Trump does not get that second term right after, the North Node going over his 10th house is going to occur when he is no longer in office. And by the time the 2024 election comes around, the North Node is going to be in his 9th house. And I'm going to come to what that means in a second. But the move towards what you have to offer in the world, where you can shine, when the North Node eclipses were going over the second and the first house around 2016 and 2020, was replaced with give up your prominence and stardom for a while, lean into networks, social circles, friends, groups to some extent. Recoup and take it from there. And in Biden's case, sorry, I'm just going into that chart. With the full moon in the 6th versus the full moon, I just thought there's enough here for both these people that signifies as they go into the 2020 election that there's a professional culmination that is in the works for them. As opposed to in Clinton's case, I remember thinking the full moon in November is kind of a full moon of retirement, is a full moon of, it's not a full moon of taking a mantle, it's a full moon of putting up your feet. Because as a Gemini rising, that is a full moon in her 12th house. Here in Biden's case in 2020, along with Trump, both full moons are in professional houses. And the eclipses somewhat evenly matched. When you have eclipses going over the 7th house, the North Node eclipses going over the 7th house, you are often making commitments and signing contracts, including for professional purposes. I didn't think it was a slam dunk one way or the other in 2020. I don't think it's a slam dunk this year either. But I did think that Trump and Biden's charts, remember, we're looking for relative strength, were more evenly matched than Trump and Clinton's. Now, let's come to this year. You know what? This is going to be interesting and entertaining for some of you. This is not going to be interesting and entertaining for others, and I get it. As I said, I rarely post stuff like this. This year, we're looking at the 5th of November, 2024. And we're pulling up the Kamala Harris. Actually, let me pull up, I'm going to keep Biden's chart up here. Because one of the things that is so curious about everything that has been going on over the past couple of weeks, of course, is it's happening just before Mercury goes retrograde. So what is Mercury retrograde going to bring for everybody? Interestingly, Kamala Harris has a Gemini rising chart like Hillary Clinton's. And Gemini as an ascendant is exactly opposite Sagittarius. So Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's signs are in the opposing houses. So if Harris has got Gemini in her 1st house, Biden has Gemini in his 7th house. Because Biden is a Sagittarius rising. With everything that has gone along over the past couple of weeks, one of the things we have to consider is when Mercury goes retrograde in August, what information is going to come up that everybody needs to consider. Out of the 3 of them, Harris has Mercury direct in her birth chart. Biden has Mercury direct in her birth chart, his birth chart, forgive me. Trump has Mercury direct in his birth chart, from whatever I can tell. Although what I'm looking at may not accurately give me I have to be honest with you. It may not accurately give me... No, it would give me, it would tell me if anything was retrograde. What planets does Trump have retrograde in his birth chart? Neptune, Jupiter. Biden has Jupiter retrograde in his birth chart. Sorry, I'm just having a sit-up moment. Harris has Jupiter retrograde in her birth chart. People who have Jupiter retrograde in their charts manifest more easily when Jupiter is retrograde, which does not happen till, wait, actually it happens in October, doesn't it? So by the time we get to the election, it is manifestation time for all three of these charts. Fascinating. The full moon this year in 2024 is exactly on Trump's midheaven. Exactly on Trump's midheaven. His midheaven, you remember where we had the Mars midheaven conjunction close to his assassination attempt? That midheaven at 24 degrees, conjuncting Algol. Now, there are a few things that I want to say. Harris has not officially become the Democrat candidate, although it's heading in that direction. Trump does have the nomination of his party, but given what has happened with Harris now, is that going to remain constant or not? Open questions. And in Biden's case, he has made a choice in these last 2 eclipse weeks. And as I look at Mercury retrograde, I think in all these cases, in Trump's case, Mercury retrograde is spending a lot of time in his first house. In Biden's case, a lot of the Mercury retrograde is occurring in his 10th house of career. Am I crazy? No, in his 9th house. 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. In his 9th house of goals. In Harris's case, a lot of the Mercury retrograde is going to be spending time in the 3rd house of communication and her immediate vicinity. So as I've been saying for everybody, May, June, and July are forward-moving months. And God knows the 21st of July, full moon, was a full moon conjunct Pluto, as we said it was going to be. A transformational, culmination-laced full moon that picked up on the first full moon in Capricorn on June the 21st, which created an edgy urgency and provided a resolution for the July 21st, second full moon in Capricorn, which was conjuncting Pluto, planet of transformation. And so it had a certain amount of uneasiness to it, but there were other aspects around the July 21st full moon that were positive and also had a sense of flow in a way that the June 21st full moon did not. I, of course, did a video on the July 21st full moon, so you can always go back and look at that if you're interested. Let's look at the eclipses, shall we? Let's look first at the Pisces eclipses, where the eclipses are going, because the last 2 weeks of July, where we're at right now, 2 weeks prior to today's date, are bringing intimations of where things are headed. For Donald Trump, Pisces is in his 8th house. The North Node is going into the 8th house, the South Node in the 2nd. Something related to his income needs to be corrected, needs to be released. It's no longer the North Node in the 2nd, as it was 8 years ago. It is going to be, even more prominently in 2025 and 2026, the South Node in the 2nd and the North Node in the 8th. And that, now of course, an obvious way to look at this is to look at the assassination attempt occurring in this kind of 2-week period. And the 8th house becomes the house of mortality. Now, I will tell you that when it comes to mortality in charts, I don't always see the 8th house active in a slam dunk kind of way. So it's intriguing to me that mortality sits in the 8th house. I think some of the things to consider could be health related for Trump, and that could be based on his age, and it could be a question mark there. But more compellingly, when the North Node eclipses move into the 8th house, first and foremost, from a personal perspective, issues of marriage, divorce, recommitment become very prominent. And recommitment basically means taking a look at what a couple holds together, or what a family holds together, and what they're going to do with it. And that process of having those discussions are really recommitting to how they're going to continue to function over the next 14, 15, 16 years, or something along those lines. It's never articulated quite that way, but that's really what is going on. But divorces, separations, coming together, partnerships on the business side, looking for investors, looking at investors, having to lean into collective property or resources while right-sizing one's own income. Sometimes I will see people who experience a kind of a financial collapse and have to kind of lean into their family or their spouse, or sort of collective income, or sometimes the government, unemployment, severance, etc., to reassess and recorrect where their income is going to come from. Sometimes if someone is embarking on a much more individual project that is close to their heart, they're looking for investors and investments. Someone wants to create their own startup. They are forming their board. In Trump's case, as we've seen with Saturn having entered his 8th house since March 2023, the shared resources part of the chart, it's also part of the chart of legal consequences. Legal decisions and contracts sit in the 7th house. The paperwork sits in the 7th house. The 8th house is the financial and emotional consequences of legal contractual obligations. Saturn entering the 8th since March 2023 has meant that what he is expected to pay to various parties as a consequence of whatever, again, I'm not going into right, wrong, good, bad, indifferent here, has certainly increased in a Saturnian way. The weight of the pressure is there. There's also a need in Saturn's case for Saturn to say, stabilize this part of the chart. It also makes you wonder who he is in partnership with, in bed with, because Neptune's influence there suggests since 2012 some sort of a crisis, someone creating loss for him. But it's not as simple as to say, oh, it's the other side. In the 8th house, it is people you are contracted to. It is people with whom you actually have ties. So is it his business contacts? Is it international contacts? Is it, what does he need to stabilize in the 8th house? It is certainly an area of crisis, and the more he focuses on that, the chart is basically saying that if he focuses on that in 2025 and 2026, he gets to then redefine his work as he enters 27, 28. Eclipses going through the 8th and the 7th houses are not yang eclipses. They are yin eclipses. You are preparing for the next stage, but you are making changes. I see people contemplating whether they want to split up from their partners. I see people doing the emotional and financial work to do that. I see people doing the emotional and financial work to figure out whether they can actually live with someone and share finances with someone, should they pop the question. I see people dealing with inheritance matters. I see people, as I said, moving back home, leaning on their partner's spouse's income to correct something financial. In Trump's case, as I've been contemplating his chart, there is this idea of consequence, and Saturn in the 8th saying these are expenses that have to be addressed. Now, you could look at Trump's upcoming presidency were he to get, certainly having a full moon right on your midheaven makes things prominent as you head to, gosh, is the Taurus full moon is on the 15th, isn't it? Give me 1 second. 15th of this month. So the election itself is on the 5th, but 10 days later, we've got 10 days later, we've got the full moon right on his most public part of the chart. Well, that's certainly flashy. But Trump has had a full moon in his career house in 2016 when he won, in comparison to Clinton, who had the full moon in her 12th house, which is not as strong as having the full moon in the 10th. With Biden, Trump had a full moon in the 10th house, but Biden had it in the 6th. Both work-related, job-related, and kind of characteristic to, I think, how it could be said with a certain amount of non-bias as to how they conducted themselves through their presidencies. One in a more 6th house way, one in a more 10th house way. Good, bad, indifferent, pros, cons, we leave that elsewhere. The full moon for Trump is in his 10th house. The full moon for Harris is in her 12th house, like with Clinton, in November. And that full moon, though, is, if it is over Trump's midheaven, it is over Harris's Jupiter in the 12th. And a full moon conjunct Jupiter could be considered auspicious, but if you just compare full moons, the more public and the more prominent one is Trump's. When you look at where the North Node is going, the more prominent placement is Harris. Why? Harris's North Node right now is going through the 11th house. She has a Gemini rising. But certainly over the past 2 weeks, if the September 17th eclipse is to be looked at, it is in her 10th house. And the 10th house eclipses, which become more prominent for her in 25 and 26. In comparison to, Trump had a visible set of eclipses when the North Node was going over his 2nd to his 1st house in 2016. In his 11th house in 2020, and still far enough from entering his 10th. The eclipses had just about started to make it to the 11th by 2020 for him. In Harris's case, they're in the 11th, but they're heading to the 10th. And that is climbing the career mountain and getting what you want. Now, promises more than it delivers. If she does assume a position of power, i.e. the presidency at that time, it's likely that the 4 years that she's going to have with the North Node eclipses going over the 10th and then into the 9th, she will experience the presidency as something she gets to check off, but there will be certain things about it that she does not, that is going to make her rethink the direction she wants to go in by the time the next re-election comes around. Because by the time the next re-election comes around, she's going to be in a similar place as to where Trump is right now. A little further along, actually, because the North Node eclipses will be in her 8th, headed to, because we're looking at 2028. So we would be looking at the eclipses moving into her 7th, 8th and 7th, being around there. Oh, interesting. Full moon favors Trump, or gives him more visibility this year. The eclipses in the North Node, as we have seen over the past 2 weeks. This is the thing about this 2 months before thing. As I said to you, I have never read it anywhere. I have just observed it. 2 months before a lunar eclipse, 2 months after a solar eclipse, the week before and after brings eclipsy occurrences. That's why I say it. And I say, every time I say it with my heart, my mouth going, this is just based on my observation. Now, whether we want to say the week before after July 17th or July 21st, it's 3 days, take your pick. But insofar as these past couple of weeks have a resonance with the September 17th eclipse and the direction where the North Node eclipses are moving in the Harris birth chart, they're moving into the 10th house of career. They are still currently in the 11th house. Let's look at the current placement. With Trump, for the rest of this year, the eclipses remain active in the 9th house. Indeed, they remain active till the end of the first week of June next year. When the eclipses are going over the 9th house, a person is often thinking about, where do I want to go next? What do I want to do? Based on everything that I have liked, disliked, enjoyed, it could very well be that the eclipses moving from the 9th to the 8th are signifying for Trump that one of the ways in which he's going to tackle and stabilize his 8th house issues is by becoming president. He becomes president and his point of focus becomes, how do I respect, how do I manage, how do I stabilize my 8th house where the expenses are mounting as a result of legal consequences? So if he wins the presidency, his focus may very well become initially about stabilizing his debts. So this idea of leaning into collective funds, investors, partnerships, to write his own income issues could be a direction in which we say things go. But typically, when the eclipses are going over the 9th house, I often see people changing direction. I mean, it could be that for Trump, it can be argued that over the past 4 years, when the eclipses went through his 11th, then went into his 10th, with the eclipses going over his 10th through Taurus till October 2023, he certainly had a lot of prominence. Indeed, till about August, September of 2021, when his 10th house eclipses started to show their influence, he was still relatively quiet after the election. And then after August, September 2021 till October 2023, his prominence, his being in the public eye, his being in the 10th house just continued to increase. When I see the eclipses move from the 10th to the 9th, which would have started from April of last year, and again taking us to June of next year, I see someone thinking about, what have I liked or disliked? And in his case, it might be, what have I liked or disliked about not being in office, not being president, not having power, not having control, and where's that propelling me to go? I don't always see people whose eclipses are moving into the 8th house getting positions of prominence. I see people whose eclipses are moving into the 10th house, Harris, getting positions of prominence. But for the rest of this year, September 17th is not November 15th or November 5th. September 17th is September 17th. That's the first of the new eclipses. So Harris gets a certain amount of prominence and gets a sense of what that prominence could look like for now. And then in 25, 26, the career-related experiences start to check off again. One of the reasons why I thought it may actually be better on the Democrat side to let Biden run with Harris as VP is because the timing seemed to work so much better if Biden won the election, for Biden to remain in office for a certain period of time, and sometime in 25 or 26 for Harris to take over. That timing makes a lot of sense to me. And it makes me wonder with this Mercury retrograde. I mean, at this point in time, it sounds ridiculous that that would happen. I can't see it happening. But I am very intrigued by the fact that this is true for all of us. As I said, the destination with the Aries eclipses is towards the end of the first week of June of next year. May, June, and July of this year are forward movement. August is a pause. What have I been assuming? What I've been thinking? What is real? What is coming up? How do I take what is real and incorporate that into my plans? That's August. So what is going to come up? What is Trump's strategy or change in strategy, or how he's communicating, or what is he's communicating about, going to have to shift? What is going to shift for Biden with regard to his goals? What is going to shift for Harris with regard to her relationship with her colleagues, her immediate community, her communication strategy? And then after September, it's all systems go. And it's a crazy process. September, October till the middle of November is forward movement. Middle of November, Thanksgiving actually, Mercury retrograde hits again. But by that time, the election is behind us, unless something happens with the election that causes, the election happens on the 5th, and with the full moon on the 15th, there's something else that comes up at around that time. Is there a recount? Is there this? Is there that? What is that going to look like that pushes us into that Mercury retrograde then? Biden's North Node currently is through his 5th house of stardom, prominence, and it retains its hold there till the end of the first week of June. In Biden's case, the eclipses are moving into the part of the chart, and this is interesting. Remember where Clinton's North Node eclipses were in 2016? In the 4th house. Pisces is in Biden's 4th house. So these last 2 weeks are doing the same thing for him that they did for Clinton in 2016. Focus on the domestic, focus on where you're going to live, focus on the private, release the public. And in doing that, you're actually somehow elevating or escalating your public position. Now, a lot depends on the stage of life you're in. If someone is going through these eclipses in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, as I said, someone may be a computer science programmer in Oklahoma City and may decide that they need to move to the Bay Area because there are greater opportunities there. So they're releasing something. So they're leaning into the domestic and where they live and the residential and the real estate, releasing something career-wise where they are, only to find that by following their North Node eclipses, it puts them in the right place so that they can avail of bigger career opportunities. When someone is older, it's an open question as to what they're going to do with regard to when you have eclipses of release in the 10th house, you are releasing something career-wise. And it does give you the opportunity to take it to the next level. Now, the next level for a president who is in his 80s may be that he gets to be involved in social and public life in a way that suits him more effectively, and where he can exercise his influence. It's not going to have as much power as being the president, clearly. But that's what, if we look at the last 2 weeks as a portent of what 25 and 26 are going to be about into February 2027, the new set of eclipses in Pisces, in Harris's case, 10th house of career. In Trump's case, shared resources, emotional and financial entanglements and partnerships. In Biden's case, where's the right place for you to be? Domestically, focusing on home, family. No, home, land, real estate, but even tied to that is releasing something career-related. Do you want to know something that is so interesting and so telling, even more than the November 5th date? Is that the full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo on March the 13th, which means the week before January 13th, plays an important role in this. And that could, of course, have to do with a change in power. For Biden, the full moon lunar eclipse in Virgo on March the 13th, with a week before and after January 13th playing an important role, is releasing something career-related. Virgo is in his 10th house. In Harris's case, that full moon involves releasing something homeland real estate related so that she can lean into career. But this is intriguing. I think her residence still currently is in Washington, D.C. So what is she giving up one home for the other and leaning into career? Or is she giving up Washington, D.C. altogether for some reason by that time? In Trump's case, it is releasing something income related, and typically it can mean releasing something job related and leaning into shared resources. Also, the October 2nd eclipse of this year, which is another solar eclipse of release for Trump, occurs in his 3rd house of immediate environment and colleagues and networks. The well he lives in. October 2nd to the week before and after December 2nd. In Biden's case, I actually see him, that's happening in his 11th house of being an ensemble player, friends. I think that for the rest of the year, Biden's going to go out with a bang. You know, he's just going to, I think that he's very much going to focus on what he can do and what he can push through, likely, possibly, I would imagine, as he heads to, if we look at the solar eclipse on October the 2nd, culminating in the lunar eclipse on March the 17th as an eclipse cycle of release. They're not in the same sign, solar eclipse in Libra, lunar eclipse in Virgo. Then Biden releases something related to friends, networks, social circles, and then ultimately releases something related to career. Trump releases something with regard to his immediate environment and his network and social circle, and ultimately releases something related to his income. Harris releases something related to her stardom, and then releases something related to real estate. One question as we look at all this, again, in Trump's case, it could simply mean that he is, I would not, when I look at this stuff, if we look at it through the lens, the Harris's chart, this is what I mean by, if Biden was staying in the race with Harris's VP, astrologically, I might have been just a little bit more comfortable. Harris has a strong chart and a strong position. I'm not counting her out. And the eclipses, as I said, well, certainly the last 2 weeks and as we head towards September the 17th. But we're not in Pisces eclipse land completely. Although, with the March 17th lunar eclipse, we're playing in that vicinity, right? We're out of the next 4 eclipses, 2 are on the Pisces Virgo axis and 2 are on the Aries Libra axis. So it's not quite as one-sided as it has been during 2024, where the majority of the eclipses are on the Aries Libra axis. Now, as we head into the lunar eclipse in Pisces on the 17th of September, the solar eclipse in Aries on October the 2nd, then moving towards the next set of eclipses in the early part, March the 17th, we've got, not March the 17th, March the 12th or 13th, we've got the lunar eclipse in Virgo, and then March the 29th, we've got the last solar eclipse in Aries. Does Trump remain the candidate? If he does, because with these eclipses of releasing immediate environment and moving into a place where he needs to stabilize his kind of shared resources more, we have to wait and see what August brings, as I've been saying for everybody. And after September, then things start to accelerate. If Trump wins the election, a massive part of that focus then for him is going to become partnerships. He's going to think of it as if he is setting up and forming his own enterprise, his own startup, his own .com, and he's going to be looking for investors, and he's going to be trying to stabilize his legal and financial house in terms of shared resources and emotional financial commitments. But he does have that full moon right on his midheaven, and he does have the fact that you've got these, the Aries North Node eclipses are still there to have, you can't count him out. Traditionally, Harris has the stronger chart by virtue of the fact that the eclipses are moving towards her career part of the chart. Certainly the last 2 weeks have favored her strongly, and the week before and after September the 17th may continue to give her prominence. What kind of prominence? Does she remain? Does Biden come? What is Mercury retrograde going to bring? I can't imagine, based on the way things run, that there's going to be a massive shift. But there are question marks as I head into August around, does Trump remain, does something dramatic happen there where his candidacy is affected? Seems so out of the realm of possibility given the fact that the Republican convention has already happened. Once we're past the middle of September and the older eclipses take on, the older eclipses favor Trump more than Harris. Although with Harris, friends, networks, social circles, pulling her back out. I mean, we're still under. This is the classic thing. Remember that in Trump's case, in 2020, the eclipses were moving from the 12th to the 11th. In Harris's case, they're moving from the 11th to the 10th. And that's where Aries and Pisces are in her chart. And with Aries, friends, networks, social circles pulling her back into the light. After she became vice president, she has not had, because her eclipses then moved into, between September, October 21 to, and this is an interesting comparison, September, October 21 to October 23, the eclipses were prominent in her 12th house. And she was not all that visible at that time. The visibility for Harris has gradually increased since April of 23, but it's in 24 with the solar eclipse on April the 8th in her 11th house, moving towards this lunar eclipse in her career house, that prominence has come in. This is charts-wise, it's the fact that the full moon on the 15th of November is conjunct Trump's midheaven. The fact that in Harris's case, there's a need to lean into career, releasing something. If Harris gets the presidency, something happens for her as a result of this term that makes her, will she be a one-term president? It's not a slam dunk there, but there's something about it that she's going to want to revise. As she goes through 25, 26, as she heads into 27, the things that she does not like about the position, she's going to think about where it is that she wants to go next. This is not a slam dunk either way. This is not a slam dunk either way. The North Node favors Harris as we head into 25-26. Slightly. No, the North Node favors Harris. The full moon favors Trump. I wonder what August is going to bring. But the North Node eclipses for Trump are a real question mark. The eclipse is moving towards the 8th. The energy just goes yin. And with Trump, after June of next year, when Jupiter goes into the 12th house, he's working behind the scenes again. Whereas for Harris, with Jupiter going into, I don't even know if any of you are still awake or still here. This is what it is like to be an astrologer. For Harris, Jupiter is in her first house, transiting her first house right now. And Jupiter is going to go into her second house by next year. She has the edge with Jupiter. This is going to be nail-biting. There is a question. I know this sounds fantastical, but there's this question for me with regard to what comes up in August. And is there something that happens to Trump's candidacy? Is there something that shifts for Harris and Biden in August? What needs to be reconsidered? I think that's the first hurdle or gate we need to pass through. Because with Trump releasing the 3rd house, leaning towards the 9th, moving towards the 8th, as I said, a massive and powerful motivation here is to sort out and stabilize his 8th house. Because Saturn has really just bam, 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 since March of 2023, just hammered him. Right, with regard to the legal cases and the fees and the fines and what he owes to everybody and all that kind of stuff that is very Saturn going over the 8th. That Jupiter position is really interesting. In Trump's case, Jupiter's over his 11th house now. Jupiter went over Trump's 10th house between May of 23 and May 25th of 2024, the end of a 12-13-year cycle, the start of a 12-13-year cycle related to career. And now, till June of next year, end of a 12-13-year cycle, start of a 12-13-year cycle related to friends, networks, social circles. You can't count him out. You still can't count him out. Who is he going to be fraternizing with? Who is he going to be making friends with? Who is he going to be releasing from a friend's perspective? And what new social circle is he going to find? Based on the position he takes on. Then, after June of next year, to the middle of 26, curtains close, working behind the scenes. In Harris's case, Jupiter right now, since May the 25th of this year, in the first house, the curtains open. She takes the limelight. I'm Kamala Harris. This is what is on my business card. This is who I'm meeting. This is who I'm talking to. After June the 8th of next year, Jupiter in the second house. Ending a 12-13-year cycle related to income, starting a new 12-13-year cycle related to income. She may She may get the candidacy, but Jupiter in the second house can also be a financial crisis, can also mean starting a new direction altogether after June of next year to start earning an income. Then Jupiter in the third, Jupiter in the fourth. The Jupiter transits favor Harris. It is a great time for her to be out and about. The larger question is the out and aboutness directly related to her getting the presidency, or is it basically starting a 12-year cycle for her with regard to an identity that's going to develop into something else, with this being a milestone? We need to go through August and enter September to see whether these two people really remain, as fantastical as that might sound, the candidates for the presidency. I can't see how that would change. That would just be, we've had enough eclipsey stuff over the past 2 weeks. If that eclipsey stuff comes up, it'll come up again week before and week after September 17th. But we need to get through it. Week before after September 17th might, if we look positively at the 10th house eclipse in Harris's chart, might anoint her as the candidate. Beyond that, as we head past September, October, November, given where these charts are at, there are pros and cons either way. But I've already told you, if Trump gets the presidency, what the focus is going to be for him from there on. He doesn't even start to think about service for another 2 or 3 years. He's going to have so much to deal with regard to his own interests and ventures and stabilizing his 8th house and who he's in partnership with. The presidency is going to be more of a platform for him for what comes after 2 or 3 years into the presidency. Because Jupiter's going to go over his 12th, then Jupiter's going to get into his 1st in 2027. All right, folks, I'm going to leave it at this. We're going to keep looking at this and developing this. I think that this is a great place. The reason why I wanted to look at this was I was so intrigued. The biggest thing I was intrigued by was, here we are again, 2 months before lunar eclipse, and we've had an eclipse 2 weeks. And some of that energy may continue now for another 4 or 5 days. But I can feel it kind of be a little bit on the tail end. We're heading right into Mercury retrograde. What is that going to bring up? And when I was looking at Harris's chart, it did make me sit up a certain amount. And then when I looked at Trump's chart again, I was just like, this makes me sit up too. But I'm very intrigued by what it is that this eclipse of release on October the 2nd in his 3rd house was going to mean for Trump. He's already had one round of this between October 16th of last year, October 14th of last year to March 24th of this year. It could be that there's an immediate circle of people that he has released already and that he continues to release. As I said, we need to get to this full moon. We need to get to this full moon eclipse on the 17th of September to really know where we stand in direct relationship to what just happened in the last couple of weeks. Something related to Trump's financial, he, as I said, he could be looking for investors. He could be looking for partners. Or something could come up for him with regard to what he owes and what he needs to pay attention to that overwhelms him and moves him into a more private space. We'll continue to watch. Thank you to anybody who made it this far. This is a very long, very unusual for me to do a video like this. Very unusual for me to do a video like this. I literally just let the camera run. Rather than have a message for you, I just let the camera run while I did what I would normally do, which is sit and try to pay attention and muse and see what I could take on and understand and all that kind of stuff. So I can't thank you enough for your patience, because for those of you who've made it this far, I'm sure it was a little bit like watching paint dry. But, it's out there for anyone who's interested in this kind of stuff and has their own thoughts. If you're going to share thoughts, please keep them partisan free. I've certainly hope I've done that this time around. And we'll continue to see where things go. If you would like me to take a look at your birth chart, please note that I'm clearer and more decisive when I read birth charts, and they're not this rambly. And anyone who's done a reading with me would likely tell you that this had a very broad, and I don't even know if these birth times are accurate for what I'm finding online. So if you would, or if you would like me to make an easy to read version of your birth chart for you, my contact and my email address is in the description box below. Use that, please, and you can contact me. I can give you information about rates, etc. There's a thanks button. You can contribute to the channel using that. Comment, like, keep it political free, please, for your own sanity and for everyone's on this channel, so that we can focus on the astrology. It will give the video greater visibility. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Next to the subscribe button, bell icon, hover over it, wiggly bell, click on that. You'll be notified when I do new videos. My videos are typically focused on the astrological energy at the time and how they relate to our individual birth charts. Typically, it's not about this kind of stuff. I just have been fascinated. And let me see, what else do I normally say, you guys? By the end of this month, I'm going to stop posting videos on Facebook and Twitter. So if that's where you're seeing these videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm sure there's something more that I should be saying, but I'm just as exhausted as you are by the end of this. I'm not really exhausted, I'm intrigued, but we need to get on to other stuff. Hope you found this, those of you who stuck with this, entertaining enough. And the next video I'm going to do is the weekly overview by this weekend, and we'll start to get back on track with my normal videos. Okay, take care.